Welcome to the latest episode of Ed Influence. I'm Nick McKenzie from Brown Jacobson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Catherine Baker, founder of Sport and Beyond and author of Stay in the Distance. Thank you, Catherine, for joining me today. I wanted to start by inviting you to tell me a story from your life that would give me a picture of who you are as a leader.
Thank you, Nick. And first of all, just to say thank you so much for having me, invited me onto the podcast. Really looking forward to our discussion. Now, that was a question that you very kindly gave me in advance, and I'm pleased that you did, because I have to say it was very thought-provoking and one I've reflected on quite a bit. When we have so many experiences and so many stories in our lives, to come up with a story that really reflects the essence of what we are and how we are as a leader, I found a really interesting challenge. In the end, I have decided to share a story which I think really sums up the area of real focus and interest and hopefully expertise that I have within all the many different areas of leadership. And it relates to a story around mentoring. So I was very kindly invited to be part of a programme last year organised by a charity called the Women's Sport Trust. Now, the Women's Sport Trust do lots of great things in the world of women's sport, but this programme in particular, called the Unlocked programme, matches elite female athletes with senior people in the sports sector who they feel can mentor the elite female athlete in the correct ways. And there's a careful process that goes into matching the athlete with the mentor. I was matched with a wonderful swimmer. I won't give you her name for reasons of confidentiality, but I was matched with a wonderful swimmer. I hadn't met her before, but I'd been given all her information. And the programme kicked off just as we were about to go on a family holiday. It was the summer holidays. And I thought to myself, I can't hold off. I can't hold off till after our holiday to have our initial call, because she's really excited. We've just been paired together. So I need to make sure I fix up a call for while I'm on holiday. So we fixed up a half-hour chat. And we had two of our children and various young people staying with us in our villa. And I said, I've got to do this call. And they all kind of wandered off and out, leaving me to it. And I said, I'd only be half an hour. 3 hours later, they came back into the villa and I was still on the call with this athlete. Why? Because we were really taking the time to get to know each other as individuals, really taking the time to make that human connection. Because I feel very strongly that in any leadership capacity, you have to really understand the people whom you are leading and who you are working with. So I think that story probably represents quite nicely the real focus that I have in any leadership role that I've had through sport, through my professional career, about really understanding the person or the people that you're leading, because you want to get the best out of them and you want to develop them. And that personal connection is absolutely critical there.
And where, thinking back on knowing that was a really important thing to do, Catherine, when did you first sort of come across that as something that was really important to you?
I'd love to say it was many, many years ago, but actually it probably wasn't. And I'm going to share an example, this time from professional career rather than sport, where it really hit home for me. So a few years ago through Sport and Beyond, we were running a leadership training program for a large global bank. And we had delivered the program to senior leaders in the UK. The program was very much around mindset. So the mindset that you bring to really drive successful performance and successful leadership. And having run the program within the UK individuals thought that we should be trying to expand it out to India, where this bank had a large base. And so we had an initial call set up with various senior individuals within the bank in India. It was obviously a remote call, Teams call, the time before that became normal. And I had 3 from my team in the UK, and we had 4 from different places in India on the call. We only had 45 minutes. And I was probably still a bit green, and I was thinking, I really want to get this work. It's going to be great for our organisation if we manage to evolve this training programme, across to India as well. So I was quite keen to really get down to the nitty-gritty in the call. And as we started the call, the senior person from the bank team in India said, Catherine, I'd like to start the call by all of us introducing ourselves and just saying a little bit about ourselves. And I was like, well, okay, let's hope that doesn't take too long, and then we can get on to the meat of the call. And she said, I'll go first so I can sort of role model what I want to be hearing from everybody. And she probably spoke for about 3 or 4 minutes, and she talked not just about her professional life, but she talked about her family commitments, family responsibilities. We've got a very good picture of her as an individual. And I started to think, gosh, we've got 7 people on the call. This is going to take up most of the call. We're never going to have time to get to the sort of nitty-gritty, and starting to feel a little bit worried about it. Anyway, we duly followed the role modelling which she'd given us. So each of us took that time to give, albeit a snapshot, but a decent snapshot in that 3 and 4 minutes. We ended up getting the work. And I firmly believe that that was driven principally by the time taken in that call to really get to know people as individuals, albeit with a short space of time, but just to understand the priority in terms of really getting to know people as individuals. So that was a really good lesson that I learned probably only 6 or 7 years ago.
Brilliant, thank you. I was going to tease up nicely. I was really interested in your book, Staying the Distance. There is a whole chapter on belonging. I was just going to invite you to, because having recently read the Owen Eastwood book, which you reference in there as well, could you share your reflections on how leaders can go about fostering belonging in their organisation, or perhaps if they're just responsible for a team within their team?
Absolutely. And I'll start, if I may, with a very powerful quote from the book, because I think it really highlights this issue. So this is a quote from a lady called Alex Jansen. Now, she was the leading goal scorer at the Rio Olympics in 2016. She was part of the GB team that won gold. This was her 3rd Olympics. So this was her 3rd attempt to win gold. They'd won bronze at London 2012, very disappointed as the home side, went to Rio. They finally got that elusive gold medal. She was the top goal scorer. And this is what Alex said after winning that gold medal. It's not the winning, it's how you win. The people you win with, the group of people you are connected to. I think that human connection is the ultimate marker of success. Now, I find that absolutely fascinating that was the first thing she said, when you would imagine it would all be about, I've won a gold medal, all about the outcome. But it wasn't. It was about human connection. And that human connection is absolutely vital to that feeling of belonging in the workplace. As you say, there's a fabulous book by a chap called Owen Eastwood, who's done work with the All Blacks, who's done work with the England men's football team, and a whole South African cricket team, a whole host of other sports and corporate organisations. Why? Because we know how important that feeling of belonging is to performance. One of the studies done through the pandemic by McKinsey looked at some of the reasons behind why people were leaving. If you remember, there was this thing called the Great Resignation. Not everyone agreed with that term, but that was the term that was being used in some of the literature and reporting through the pandemic. So McKinsey did a piece of research looking at, why is it that people are actually leaving? What they discovered was that there was a disconnect between why employers thought their people were leaving and why employees actually were. Employers tended to put it down to what we call transactional reasons, so pay, bonus, that kind of thing. Actually, what the employees were saying was it was much more about relational issues, so feeling valued, seeing a sense of progression, and very specifically, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was 50-something% said really that they were leaving because they didn't feel a sense of belonging. So how can leaders try and help encourage that and facilitate that within a workplace? Well, number one, we've already highlighted, get to know your people as people rather than just in their, so for example, get to know your people as people rather than lawyers, or as people rather than bankers, or as people rather than consultants, etc. So really take the time to get to know your workforce as individuals. Absolutely important that. If you're running a big team, it can be very hard, can't it, to give time as a leader individually to everyone in your team. Chunk it down. It doesn't have to be all with you. You can make sure that you pair people up, so they're making sure that they spend time as individuals, getting to know each other, having an informal coffee, whatever it is. So really making sure that you're covering your whole team, albeit it doesn't have to be just you. The other thing I'd add that's really important is that sense of identity. In the book, I share a story around London Pulse, which is one of the franchises in the Netball Super League. one of the things they've been incredibly successful at, bearing in mind they're a very, very diverse franchise. They've got over 30 languages spoken, in the changing room. So one of the things they've been really successful at is creating a strong sense of identity. On the court, their identity is London Pulse wins ball. Very effective because netball is a possession game. But off the court, their overriding principle, their overriding sort of value is around humility. And that underpins everything they do off the court, including how they engage with their local community. That provides a very strong sense of identity, that everyone within the club knows what London Pulse is all about. They understand the DNA of London Pulse. Bring that back to organisations generally within the world of work. I think many organisations are very good at setting out a vision, a mission, a purpose, whatever terminology you want to use. And also many organisations very good now at coming up with a set of values. But the challenge is to bring those to life every single day, not just leave them looking pretty on the walls, not just leave them on your screensaver or on your documentation, but actually bring them to life every single day, sharing stories, making sure that you're rewarding and, giving approval where you see the right values being put into place, etc. So bringing that vision, mission, purpose, and those values to life every day also, I think, can really help to drive that sense of identity and therefore belonging.
Thank you. Perhaps switching back to you as an individual, I just wanted to ask, what would you say is the main motivation of your leadership, Catherine?
That's a big question, Nick. I am fascinated by human potential and human performance. And I'll share a personal story, if I may, for I think one of the drivers behind that. So I'm one of 5. My parents had 5 children within 6 years. My twin and I were numbers 4 and 5. We were very much the unexpected numbers 4 and 5. My parents had 2 boys and then a girl, and they were very happy. And then my mother discovered she was pregnant, and it's the days when you didn't even know if you were having twins. So 2 weeks before we were born, she was suddenly told that she had 2 heartbeats in her tummy rather than just one. So it meant for a fairly chaotic but wonderful childhood with my elder brother sort of very much in charge of the children and the games. When my elder brother turned 19, the day he turned 19, very sadly, he had a bad accident. So he was walking on the pavement and he got knocked over by a drunk driver. In the days before mobile phones, etc. So it was all very traumatic. Amazingly, my brother survived. He was in a coma for 6 months. He was in hospital for 3 years, didn't talk for 2 years post the accident, and he is still with us despite all the prognosis at the time. He's an incredible character and an incredible inspiration and has been throughout my entire life. And I think why that's a driver for my leadership is that, 2 reasons. Firstly, despite everything that's been thrown at him, he's brain damaged and quadriplegic. He still manages to laugh and to smile and to make the best of his situation. It also reminds me every day when I wake up that I've got 2 arms and 2 legs that function. And therefore there is a duty or a responsibility on me to really get the best out of myself. And I translate that across, I think, to the people that I lead to make sure that they get the best out of themselves as well.
That's a very powerful story, Catherine. Going back to your career, I was really interested that you had a bit of a step change sort of partway through your career. Could you talk a bit about what caused that for you in terms of, I suppose I'm thinking about your motivation here in terms of, was it going back to those roots and that initial inspiration and that figure for you, or something else that made you make the jump?
Yeah, it sounds like quite a drastic shift, doesn't it, from corporate lawyer across to focusing on leadership and mindset. But as ever with these things, it's not quite as clear cut or drastic as it. There's always kind of steps along the way. So as you've highlighted, kind of early years, very much around sport. And in fact, my first qualification was as a tennis coach. But really, I think in the time when, as a young woman, or as a girl then a young woman, a professional career in sport probably wasn't something which was so obvious, so talked about, the route wasn't so clear. I was very privileged with my education and sort of did quite well. So I had that academic route open to me and decided to go down that route, and was very fortunate then sponsored through law school by Linklaters and got my sort of training there. So sport very much within my DNA, but took that decision to go down the legal route. I also played 2 sports, tennis and hockey, to representative level. I was told when I was 12 if I wanted to make it, I had to choose between the 2, but I couldn't because I loved them both for different reasons. So went down the corporate law route and am incredibly grateful for what that career gave me in terms of understanding what hard work really looks like, understanding what professionalism looks like, and being surrounded by lots of incredibly driven, incredibly bright people. My husband was also a lawyer at that stage, and we wanted to have a family. So we very quickly were blessed with 3 boys. And as I'm sure many of the listeners will appreciate, 2 people trying to juggle quite, full-on careers whilst wanting to bring up a family in the right way is a significant challenge. So we took the decision that I would step back slightly, which I was very happy to do. And I sort of took on, once I sort of left private practice after 13 years, I took on a few roles, which I now refer to now as almost treading water. So roles where I felt I had to be challenged a bit and learn something new, but where I could fit it around the family. So I taught on the law degree at York University. I did some tennis coaching. I worked for an amazing company to build up my facilitation and training skills. That, I think, all gave me the confidence to realise there was a world out there beyond being a lawyer, and that I did have some other skill sets which I've been able to build up. Once the children got older and became a little bit more independent, I think that confidence from having taken a slight sideways step really helped me in thinking, with this opportunity I've got for the second half of my career, what is it that I really want to do? Where do I really want to make a difference? And where do I feel I've got significant strengths? And that's what led me then to set up Sport and Beyond back in 2015. My children very kindly helped me come up with the name. When we first set up the business, it was twofold. It was one, helping elite athletes as they transitioned out of their sport, whatever that sport was, to think about what to go into next. So that was the first aspect of Sport and Beyond. The second bit was taking all the good stuff from sport around mindset and leadership across to business, which is the bit that obviously sits very firmly with what we do now.
I'm really curious in terms of with what you've just said then. So your book is very much about sustainable performance and bringing the lessons from sport into business. You obviously sit that sort of slightly dual role. Do you take anything that you've seen from the business world and all the roles that you have into sport?
Absolutely, and in fact, I've had a lot of people telling me that should be my second book to sort of swap it the other way. And I think the first thing to say on that is that I'm certainly not advocating that everything from sport is A, brilliant, or B, should be taken across into business and leadership. There are definitely some areas where I think sport can improve, and what I've done with the book is to really shine the spotlight on the lessons that I think have been missing, not about high performance in the moment, not about winning, but about that sustained long-term performance. Definitely there are some brilliant aspects from business that you can take back across into sport. In the book I share case studies around Netflix, Microsoft, etc. So there are some very good learnings that come across from business back into sport as well.
Thank you. I was wondering whether there's somebody that's really influenced you as a leader that you perhaps followed in your career. Either they've led you or that you've sort of been an avid follower from more of a distance. Is there anyone that's inspired you?
Well, I'll mention a couple if I may. I mean, I think the first one in terms of following a bit more from a distance is obviously Gareth Southgate. So Gareth very kindly wrote the foreword to my book. We have known each other for a number of years. We're personal friends. And I have just the utmost admiration for the way he has conducted himself in a job which it's very hard for anyone to understand the pressures that Gareth is under, being in the public spotlight, to the extent that he is. And I think one of the things that Gareth has done, which is particularly significant, is to demonstrate that some of those leadership behaviours that perhaps historically people would have equated more with female leadership, so things like compassion and empathy, he's demonstrated actually that it's not gender specific, it's about whatever skill set you have as a leader. Those are some of the tools in his toolbox, and it's been incredibly effective in generating and nurturing a really good culture within the men's football team, and then off the back of that, a really good performance on the pitch. So Gareth's definitely one, and I'm incredibly privileged and grateful for the fact that he's written the foreword to the book. I'll mention one other if I may, and this is actually back into the legal field, and this individual actually, Nick, that I'm going to mention, and that's Dan Kane. So Dan Kane is the founder of O-Shaped, and actually technically in a way I'm his boss because I'm the chair of O-Shaped. But Dan is someone who I very willingly followed. You know, if you think of that, there's a brilliant YouTube video of somebody, lots of people sitting on a hill, and somebody starts dancing, and they look like a bit of a, you know, a bit odd on their own. And then one person joins, and then the next, and then the next, and suddenly everyone's dancing. That is Dan. So the first time I met Dan, it was at a conference, and he was talking about how he's trying to drive change in the legal sector, how he's trying to make sure that people first really matters and is an actual reality, how he's trying to make sure that legal professionals are developed and trained with broader skills than just kind of black letter law. I met Dan at a conference. I was blown away by his vision, by his determination, and by the fact that he had gathered around him an incredibly good team. You know, he realized he couldn't do it on his own. He realized he had to get a very good team around him. So I really became a follower of Dan. We met for a coffee. I said what I thought he was doing was brilliant, but I asked him a series of challenging questions, which he perhaps didn't have the answers to. And that was the start of what's been to date, and hopefully will continue to be, a really, really productive and enjoyable relationship. So if I can extrapolate from that, I think that clear vision, something which you can really get behind and which really hits you in the stomach. But more than that, you know, lots of people can come up with a vision, can't they? That ability to exhibit the determination to really follow through on it and to get a really good team of people around you.
That I can relate to the piece you just said about challenging questions, because the first time I met you, you asked me a series of challenging questions. I'm curious, did he come back straight away to that, or was that something he took his time to respond to you to?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, this is part of why I think he's such an impressive leader. So the challenging questions were over coffee. Some he could answer, some he couldn't. The ones he couldn't, he took away. And actually then, and this was before I was on the steering board, invited me to come in and work with the steering board to actually help them bring more rigor and get to a better place of understanding of what they were trying to do. So not only did he listen, he actually invited me in, not knowing me very well at that stage at all, to work with him and his steering board.
And if I ask, I mean, what Dan's doing and what he's done, he had the courage of his convictions, clearly. What does courage mean for you as a leader?
Gosh, Nick, another very good question. Courage of convictions is, I think, relevant. But do you know, I think there's a very interesting aspect of courage which gets underlooked, which is a courage to admit that you're wrong and to change your mind. I think that's vital. The word courage tends to bring up, doesn't it, sort of strong and warrior-like and certainty and clarity, etc. And I think, yes, all of those things are important. But I think real courage is where you've got the ability to face what's in front of you, be open-minded, listen, learn, and be prepared to possibly look a bit stupid and say, do you know what, I was wrong, or you've convinced me otherwise, or the situation's changed and we need to change our decision. I think that's a really important aspect of courage, which often gets overlooked.
I can definitely relate to that, Catherine. Your book is about providing lessons and tools for people to sustain their leadership journey. I was curious where you're up to in terms of your leadership journey and what you're working on at the moment.
Thank you, Nick. That's another really good question. I think in terms of, well, I'll start, I guess, with the anchor for my decision making around what I'm doing, and then a bit of an update in terms of where I'm spending my time. So when I was a corporate lawyer, it's quite straightforward. You almost don't have to think about what you're doing, do you? That's what you do. And actually, if someone says, what are you? It's very easy to say I'm a corporate lawyer. One of the things with my second career is it's much harder to explain what I do. And I still haven't got it nailed. You know, that question of someone says, Catherine, what do you do? So a few years ago, to really help me not just be able to answer that question, but more importantly, really make decisions about where to spend my time, I decided to come up with my own personal mission. Now, the background to this is I've got a good friend who's a FTSE 100 CEO, and he went off to Harvard for 6 weeks on a leadership course. And when he came back, I said, Richard, what did you learn on your leadership course? And he said, inspire breakthrough. And I was like, hang on, you've been to Harvard for 6 weeks and you've come back and you're telling me you've learned 2 words. And he said, no, Catherine, the whole course was about really understanding what your personal mission is for the stage of the career that you're at. So I found that really helpful, took that away and did some work myself to come up with mine. Annoyingly, I haven't got it down to 2 words, but I have got to the point that my personal mission is to inspire belief and enable progress. So inspire belief and enable progress. Both elements I think are very important. You can't just inspire belief without helping people and giving them the tools to actually develop and progress as well. I use that as a framework or as a lens through which to make decisions about what to take on in terms of roles and not. So the majority of my day job now is around coaching senior leaders. Obviously, that fits very squarely within that inspiring belief and enabling progress. I am building an increasing non-exec portfolio, but carefully chosen again to fit within that. So I'm a trustee on the board of the Dame Kelly Holmes Trust, which is a youth charity using athlete mentors to try and help instill the mindsets and behaviours of elite athletes into young people who face disadvantage due to inequality in their everyday lives. I'm also chair of O-Shaped, as we talked about, and that's very much about changing the way that lawyers are trained and developed and really making sure we put people first. I'm on the board of governors at a local private school as well, partly because my 3 children have been through it and have just had the most amazing experience, but also the school is very important within the community. And it gives me that aspect of that link to young people in education. I struggle with time a bit. I have an elderly mother who lives on her own 3 hours away, and I am technically in charge of her and do all her shopping and her admin, as well as having my own family and all these different roles. So it is always a challenge, but I find that personal mission really, really useful to help me make my decisions about how to spend my time.
Thank you. And on time, I was curious how you make time to think as a leader, and if you are thinking, what are the sorts of things, the questions you ask yourself?
Yeah, again, a really good question, Nick, I think, and I'll give you an answer, I think, in 2 ways, if that's okay. First of all, with respect to me, but also it's something I spend a lot of time when I'm coaching senior leaders, and I'll sort of share some of the advice I give there. So for me, my thinking time is when I run or walk. So I run or walk every day, and I don't sort of listen to stuff. Sometimes I'm walking, I listen to podcasts, but when I run, I don't listen to anything at all. I don't have any tech with me. It is literally my thinking time. And as we all know, when you're moving, when you're doing something different, your brain engages in a different way. Some of those subconscious thoughts come up into your conscious mind. And so I find it incredibly valuable if I've got things I'm chewing over, things that I can't quite solve. That's how I really find that time. It is an issue that comes up pretty much with every coaching relationship I have. How, as a senior leader, do you carve out the time and space to actually have that thinking time? There's all sorts of different little sort of hacks, but one of them is called the Schultz hour. And this comes from the 1950s in America, when there was a Secretary of State called George Shultz, who was very, very well known for having an hour a week where he locked everybody out of his office. He sat there with a pencil and a pad of paper with no agenda and just used to write down his thoughts in that hour. And he would swear by the fact that that was a really useful time to have that more strategic, that more reflective thinking. For clients, it's not just about understanding what to do, but then it's making sure it happens. So making sure that you lock out time in your diary. Call it what you want, but make sure you block out that time in the diary. Manage expectations around you. So understand that people know that they can't interrupt you unless it's an absolute emergency. If you've got that time padlocked in your diary, that's your thinking time. It is critical for you in your role to have that time, and so you're not to be disturbed. It's a discipline, but it's a really important one.
And in terms of, is it very free form for you, or would you have certain questions that you find you revisit time and time again that you might ask yourself in that thinking time?
Yeah, so sometimes I have particular conundrums that I'm sort of dealing with, and definitely other times it might be more reflective in terms of should I take this thing on? Should I say yes to this piece of work? Am I making sure that I'm developing this person in the right way? Should I be changing my approach, etc.? So it could be sometimes some of those more fundamental questions that you're thinking about as well. And one of the other ways that I do that, back in 2019, for all sorts of reasons, we needed to have a restructure of Sport and Beyond. And actually, again, we were on holiday, and I'd actually written down a series of questions on a piece of paper. And I said to my husband, right, we're going to go for a walk on the beach, and I want you to ask these questions. And he sort of started to ask one that wasn't the question number one. I said, no, I need you to ask them in this order because it's going to really help me get to the right solution. And lo and behold, 2 hours later, having come back from the walk on the beach, I was in a much better place in terms of my decision making.
Really interesting story about bringing your husband in to help you with that. Was his job just to ask the questions, or did he spar with you a bit in terms of your responses?
Mostly the former, and he's very good at holding back and not giving me his view, but equally the sparring and the challenging is really helpful as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting relationship. Thinking about leadership and the range of experience you've had both personally and the different leaders you coach and support and mentor, what do you think is the most difficult thing of part of being a leader these days?
Well, I think it probably links to what we've just been talking about. I think one of the hardest challenges is clarity on what your role involves. So a bit of context behind that. By the time you get to a leadership position, you're probably quite good at what you do, and you've probably built up a significant amount of experience in various skill sets. The danger with that is that you just keep doing more and more and more. So I definitely think one of the key challenges is, as you move up to a leadership position, particularly to senior leadership, to get good at saying no, to get good at really understanding what your role involves and what it doesn't, to get good at working at the right level, so making sure that you're strategic, you're at a leadership level rather than too much of an operational level, albeit sometimes you might have to kind of do that dive into things. So for me, I think that's a significant challenge, and I see it with many leaders with whom I'm privileged to work, that aspect around, can you really clearly define your role in 1 or 2 sentences? Can you tell me what that looks like in terms of verbs? So I'd be looking for things like leading, inspiring, facilitating, supporting, rather than the doing type of words, which are more management than leader. And being very clear as to the priority areas for you within your role. Is it about setting a vision and a strategy? Is it about liaising with external stakeholders? Is it about building clients? Is it about leading your team? So understanding really clearly what are the areas of priority for you.
Thank you. I was just listening to you there. The next question I suppose I had was, I was curious what you'd say about values and how that sort of informs your leadership. I know there's a whole section in your book on values, isn't there? I was just curious what your reflections would be for our listeners there.
So do you want me to talk about personal values and organisational values? Would that be useful?
That'd be brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start with organisational values. I think, it's become a bit of a thing, hasn't it, to come up with organisational values. And there are all sorts of brilliant organisations out there that can help you to do that. And, organisations now come up with all sorts of wonderful values. The challenge with that is that often they stop there. So I always talk about 3 levels you've got to go through. You've got to do the agree, you've got to do the embed, and you've got to do the reinforce. Many organisations stop at the agree. So they work really well to agree a set of values. They probably have an incredibly good process where they involve everyone within the organisation and they bring people along with them, and everyone's really excited about the launch of the new values. But what they don't do is go through the embedding and then the constant reinforcing. It's a bit like your garden. You might have your garden looking beautifully in 1 week in the summer because all the flowers have come up, but it's not, you have to keep cultivating, you have to keep working. So really making sure that you're embedding them, that the values are relevant across the board, that they are constantly being reinforced. Are they reflected in personal development plans? Are they reflected in reward and remuneration? Are they reflected in the internal newsletters where you're sharing really good case studies and stories about when values have been lived and breathed? They should really be fundamental to everything an organisation does. They should be influencing decision making at all levels of the organisation, and too often we don't see that. Move it across to personal values. It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because we talk a lot about organisational values. The chance of an organisation's values absolutely matching your personal values are pretty slim, aren't they, really? But so I think first step, have you taken the time to really understand and think about what your personal values are? It's something which is easy not to do, but in fact is a very, very valuable process to go through. So what are the things that really matter to me? What are the values that are really important to me? And I'll share, if I may, he might tell me off for this, but I'll share a story from my eldest son. So he's just graduated, although he hasn't, because he hasn't had his stuff marked, but we'll say he's graduated. And he's taking a year off, and he's been looking for a 4-month job before he goes traveling. Quite a few of his peer group are doing the same, and a lot of them have been applying for permanent jobs, working on the basis it's easier to get a job like that, and then they can just resign and off they go. Interestingly, with our eldest son, and this came as a bit of a surprise to us, he is very clear, he didn't want to lie. So he said, I don't want to take a job pretending it's permanent and then disappear. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair. I want to have a bit more integrity around it. So I'm going to be very clear, I'm looking for a 4-month job. And to cut a very long story short, despite us saying, okay, good luck, it's going to be quite hard, luckily he's managed to find something really good. So that's an experience he's been through, which actually will help him understand what one of his values is, which I think is great, and we don't all have that opportunity. So take the time to understand your personal values. Where I think we're then working for organisations where there's too much of a disconnect between the two, it's probably not going to be a good fit, is it? It's never going to be a perfect match. But if our personal values are very different from the organisation, you're probably going to have to be something you're not. We talked about belonging earlier, that ability to bring your whole self to the workplace. If you feel that you've got to kind of fit in rather than have a real sense of belonging because your values are different, you're probably not going to be able to sustain your performance and stay the distance.
Thank you. And what advice would you, approaching towards the end of our time, but what advice would you give? I don't know whether maybe you can choose or answer both. Give to a learning leader or perhaps an experienced leader that you're coaching. What are the sorts of your go-tos for advice, Catherine?
Well, I'm going to do both because there's a really nice connection between the two. So let's start with learning leaders. I think one of the things that often comes up with people who are early in their leadership journey is a little bit of, am I good enough to be a leader? Do I have the right skill set? And often that comes because they have experienced leadership in a certain way. So they might have been led by someone who has a certain leadership skill set. Or they might also admire people in the public sphere or whatever who lead in a certain way. And they might look to themselves and say, do you know what, I'm not like that, therefore I'm not going to be a good leader. So one of the things I really enjoy helping new leaders with is to understand that there are all different types of leadership. There is no one way to lead. We're all going to bring different strengths to leadership roles. So you might have been led by someone who is incredibly good at the vision and the articulation and the inspiring everybody, but actually not very good at the follow through, at the making things happen, at the sticking to the plan, etc. So understanding that we're all going to bring our own skill sets to our leadership role, really valuing those and making sure that where we have got those gaps, we're covering those in the team. So that's definitely relevant for learning leaders. The nice link to experienced leaders, you can always learn. So, it doesn't matter how much you've been leading for, there are always new tools that you can add into your toolbox. There are always new things that you can learn. And the best leaders that I come across are the ones who never think they're the complete package. They are always mindful of the fact they've got more to learn.
And on that, what's the most recent thing that you've learned?
Now, that is a very good question because I kind of think that I'm learning stuff every single day. So let me think about something which is going to be most useful for the audience. So over the last couple of days, we've been very busy interviewing for new trustees for one of the boards that I'm on. And 3 of us have been on the interview panel. And one of the things that has really reminded me is that none of us is as good as all of us. So whereas I might have a particular view about a candidate and ask particular questions, the fact that I've got 2 other very different people on the interview panel who are coming at it from a very different perspective has really enabled me to remember that that's absolutely vital in really understanding a situation better, coming up with a better decision, and as I said, that reminder of none of us is as good as all of us.
That certainly resonates with me. I very much enjoy working in small collaborative groups because you do get so much from those environments, I think.
Yeah.
So very, very near the end then, I just was going to ask you, what brings you, say, 80% of your joy as a leader?
Well, I think it probably won't come as a great surprise if my answer is developing people. It comes back to that fundamental interest in human potential, human performance, and where you feel that you've been able to have a positive impact on developing someone as an individual. I can't think of a greater reward than that.
And it may well be linked to us, but I was got a final question for you. I was going to ask you, what would you like your legacy to be from the work and your roles on boards when you finally decide that you're going to hang up your boots, as it were?
And it's an interesting question because I have the privilege of working in with lots of different organisations across many spheres. I often get told that I'm a real positive presence, and I think that would be a lovely thing to have said about me. It's not the whole story, is it? Being positive is all very well, but I think it's a very important starting point. So being positive, and then I think really coming back to the mission, it's not just about being positive and inspiring belief, but actually having been able to tangibly really help develop and improve people and make a difference in the areas in which I'm sort of passionate.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you very much for joining me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our discussion and the stories you've shared with me, and I hope our listeners have as well. And I look forward to you joining us for the next in our series of Ed Influence podcasts.
Perfect. Thanks very much for inviting me on, Nick. I've really enjoyed it.
Pleasure.